The lake that holds unspoken words. Part 1. The shore. There is a place that cartographers have, on the whole, declined to visit. This is not negligence on their part. The cartographers who have come closest to it, and there have been 3 over the course of what passes for time in this part of the world, have each produced careful notes, competent sketches, and ultimately inconclusive reports, because the place in question does not stay still long enough to be mapped with any confidence. And a map of something that moves is not a map but a theory, and cartographers, as a profession, are not in the business of theories. What can be said with reasonable certainty is this: there is a valley, broad and unhurried in its proportions, flanked on its northern and southern edges by hills of pale grey stone that rise without drama to a height sufficient to shelter the valley floor from whatever weather exists beyond them. The hills are old in the particular way of hills that have never been quarried or climbed for sport, or given names by the sort of people who give hills names. They have the settled, anonymous dignity of things that have been exactly what they are for longer than anything has been watching. In the floor of this valley, there is a lake. The lake is large, not dramatically large. It does not inspire the kind of vertiginous awe that very large bodies of water sometimes produce in people who stand at their edges and contemplate their own insignificance. It is large in the quieter sense, large enough that the far shore is visible only on the clearest days as a thin, dark suggestion at the limit of the eye's comfortable range, large enough that sound, once it leaves the near shore, does not return, large enough that the water in the middle has never been touched by anyone's hand, and likely never will be. The water is a color that resists description despite being, in isolation, a perfectly simple color. It is blue, it is gray. It is the specific blue-gray of the sky at 4 in the morning, which is neither night nor day, but the seam between them, a color that has absorbed the last of the dark and not yet admitted the light, that sits in perfect suspension between what was and what will be. This is its color at noon. This is its color at midnight. The sky above changes as skies do, cycling through its ordinary business of cloud and sun and the reddish mathematics of sunrise and sunset. The lake pays no attention to any of this. The near shore is a strip of pale stone, perhaps 20 feet wide, between the water's edge and the first of the trees. The stones are flat and smooth, and the size of a large hand, each one worn to a surface that the fingertips find satisfying in the way of things shaped by patient, impersonal force over an immeasurable time. They shift when walked upon, not dangerously, not enough to turn an ankle, but with a deliberate quality, each stone resettling against its neighbors, with a sound that is somewhere between a whisper and a click, as though the shore is conducting a continuous quiet conversation with itself about the arrangements of its own surface. The trees behind the shore are of no species that a botanist would recognize with confidence, though each one would recognize something. This one's similar to a birch, that one carrying a suggestion of ash, another with the dark and slightly excessive bark of a yew that has been taking itself seriously for several centuries. Their canopy is not dense. Light comes through it in the late afternoon at a low angle, falling on the stones in long, pale strips that move slowly as the light moves, so that the shore is in a state of continuous, imperceptible change, always slightly different from one moment to the next, never different enough to startle. This is, on the whole, the character of the place. Maren Voss has kept this shore for as long as she can sensibly account for, and somewhat longer than that. She was, before she was here, a woman of practical habits and strong opinions who had spent the better part of 2 decades as a records administrator for a municipal archive in a northern city, a position that had suited her considerably better than most people supposed it would when she described it at dinner parties, which she had eventually stopped attending because the dinner parties always ended with the same polite incomprehension, and she had grown bored of performing patience in response to it. She had liked the work. She had liked the order of it, the satisfaction of a thing properly catalogued, the knowledge that information placed in her care would be retrievable by the right person at the right moment. She had been good at it in the way that some people are good at things that others consider modest, thoroughly, without fanfare, and with a private and uncomplicated pride that needed no external confirmation. She had arrived at the lake the way she had arrived at most things in her life, not dramatically, not following a vision or a calling or any of the elevated vocabulary that people use when they want their choices to sound larger than they are. She had simply found the path and followed it with the pragmatic curiosity that was her dominant mode, and arrived on the shore and understood immediately and without ceremony that her experience in records administration was going to be more relevant here than she might have expected. The lake, it turned out, needed someone to keep records. It had been keeping its own in its way for longer than Maren could determine, but records without a keeper are simply accumulation. An accumulation without order is simply weight, and the lake had enough of that already. She had found the cottage a short walk into the trees, small, stone-built, its roof sound, its single main room occupied by a fireplace of generous proportions, and on a long wooden table that ran the length of the south wall, 47 notebooks of varying age and condition, each one filled with handwriting that was not hers, and that she had spent the first several weeks reading with the concentrated attention she had once brought to the backlog of a newly acquired archive. She had then taken the 48th notebook from the drawer where it was waiting, had opened it to the first page, and had begun. The 48th notebook is nearly full now. Maren knows this without checking, in the way she knows most things about the lake and its contents. Not through any faculty she would have claimed before arriving here, but through the particular attentiveness that extended proximity to the lake seems to produce in people willing to let it. She has become, over time, sensitive to the lake, the way certain people become sensitive to weather, not predicting it exactly, not commanding it, simply aware of its changes before those changes have fully declared themselves. She is standing at the shore when you arrive, which is where she is most mornings and most evenings, and a significant portion of the time in between. Her coat is the dark green of a bottle, heavy wool, with 4 pockets of which she uses 3 constantly, and has never used the 4th, which seems to exist in case of an emergency she has not yet encountered. Her hair is dark with threads of grey at the temples, worn back with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who resolved the question of hair long ago and has not revisited it. She is not a tall woman, but she has the stillness of a tall one, the quality of taking up exactly the space she occupies and being entirely comfortable there. She is looking at the water. She looks at the water the way a doctor looks at a patient they know well, not anxiously, not casually, but with the measured attention of someone performing an assessment that has become, through long practice, second nature. She notes things. She files them. She responds to them when response is called for and records them when it isn't. She hears you on the stones before she sees you. Mind the footing, she says, without turning. They're stable enough, but they'll tell you otherwise if you're not paying attention. Her voice has the quality of someone accustomed to speaking in rooms where quiet is the norm. Not a whisper, not hushed, but calibrated. Words placed with the same care that she places everything. She turns then and looks at you with clear grey eyes that are assessing without being unkind, and nods once in the manner of a person confirming a thing they expected. Good, she says. You're here. The lake at this hour, the perpetual near dawn of it, is at its most transparent. This is something Maren noted in the 48th notebook on an early page and has confirmed repeatedly since. The water's visibility varies, not with light as such, but with something else, something she has recorded as ambient clarity for lack of a more precise term, a quality that increases in the early part of the day and diminishes toward what passes for evening here, as though the lake grows more private as the day continues, draws its contents closer, becomes less willing to show what it holds. In the morning clarity, the shallows near the shore reveal their bed with the precision of old glass, every pale stone visible, every shift in the depth apparent, the topology of the lake's edge laid out with a cartographic honesty that the rest of the place does not generally extend to anything. And between the stones, in the places where the bed is level and the water stills, light. Small points of it, warm and amber, distributed across the visible shallows with no obvious pattern, not evenly spaced, not clustered entirely at random, but arranged in the way that things arrange themselves when they are responding to each other rather than to any external principle. Each point is faint on its own. Together, in the aggregate, they give the shallows a warmth that the lake's blue-grey surface does not prepare you for. They're brighter in the morning, Maren confirms, beside you now. I don't know why. I stopped needing to. She says this with the equanimity of a woman who has made her peace with incomplete information, not incuriously, not as a defeat, but as a professional accommodation, the kind that experienced practitioners in any field develop when they have been dealing long enough with a subject that declines to be fully understood. What you're seeing, she says, is what the lake holds. A pause in which the shore performs its small adjustments beneath your feet, and the water makes its minimal lap against the lowest stones. Words, she says, ones that were never said. She gives you time to look. This is characteristic of Maren. She does not rush the thing she has just told you to a conclusion or an elaboration. She has told it to enough people in enough versions of this morning to know that the information requires a settling period before it can usefully be added to. You look at the lights in the water. They do not move, not in the way of living things. They hold their positions with the steadiness of objects that have been where they are for long enough to have acquired a relationship with the particular stones around them. But they are not static in the way of dead things either. There is a quality of presence about them, a warmth that is not merely optical. You are aware of it at the shore's edge as a slight softening of the air, a degree or two of additional warmth that has no meteorological explanation. Not all unspoken words, Maren says, correctly anticipating the question. She reaches into one of her 3 active pockets and produces a small notebook, not the 48th, something more portable, a field notebook of the type used by naturalists, and opens it with the automatic gesture of someone for whom producing a notebook is as natural as producing a hand. The ones that change something by not being said. Those are the ones with weight enough to find the water. She reads something briefly, closes the notebook. There are families in here that go back generations, she says. The same silence, passed down like furniture, and ones that arrived last week, a single conversation that didn't happen. She looks at the water. The lake makes no distinction, old or recent, large or small. If it had weight, it's here. The shore adjusts beneath your feet. The lights in the shallows hold their warmth against the blue-grey cold of the deeper water. Maren puts the field notebook away and produces, from the same pocket, with the efficiency of someone who has organized their coat with some care, a small folded map, hand-drawn, dense with annotation, sections of the shore marked with numbers that correspond, presumably, to an index in the 48th notebook back at the cottage. Walk with me, she says. It is not quite a question. It is the kind of invitation extended by someone who has something to show you and considers showing it the best use of the available time. The stones shift their soft shift. The lake accompanies you on your left, patient and enormous, and the color of the moment before morning, holding in its depths everything that was ready to be said and wasn't. All the words that sat at the back of the throat and went no further. All the sentences that began in the chest and ended there. All the declarations and confessions and simple true things that the moment swallowed before the voice could. All of it here, in the water, warm and amber and quietly present, waiting with the particular patience of things that have already waited long enough and have made their peace with it. Maren walks the way she does everything, with a deliberateness that is not slowness exactly, but a refusal to move faster than the situation warrants. The situation, in her assessment, never warrants very fast. She has the field notebook out again, consulting it periodically with the brief practiced glance of someone cross-referencing rather than reading. The information is largely already in her head, the notebook confirming rather than supplying. She pauses at a point on the shore where 3 flat stones have been arranged upright, pushed into the shingle like markers, which is what they are. "Here," she says. The water at this section of the shore is slightly shallower than average, the pale bed visible in some detail, and what is visible in it, between a large flat stone and a cluster of smaller ones in the clear cold water of the morning, is not 1 light, but 3, arranged within a few feet of each other. Their warmth overlaps at the edges, producing between them a combined glow that is more considerable than any one alone. A small amber region in the blue-grey shallows that has the quality of a lit window seen from across a street. 3 lights, close together, their edges touching. A family, you ask? 3 generations of one, Maren says. She opens the notebook to a page dense with her handwriting, which is not unusual. Silences in families tend to compound. The original one creates the conditions for the next, and so on. By the 3rd generation, nobody remembers where it started, which makes it considerably harder to stop. She looks at the water for a moment. This one started with a woman named Edna Poole, she says. Born 1921, died 1987. Farmer's wife in the north of England, County Durham. Practical woman, by all accounts. Not given to sentiment, which was partly temperament and partly the times and partly 62 years of marriage to a man who considered expressing feeling a category of weakness, the way some men of that generation and that particular landscape did, not cruelly, just as a fact, the way you might consider it a weakness to go out without a coat. She pauses. Her husband's name was Arthur. He was not a bad man. He was, by most available evidence, a reasonably good one. He worked hard and provided well and was not unkind. He simply came from a long line of people who had confused silence with strength, which is one of the more persistent and transferable confusions available to a person. Edna's words had been waiting for the right moment for 11 years. She had composed them in the way that people compose things they intend to say, not written down, not rehearsed exactly, but turned over in quiet moments, refined, until they had the shape of something she could actually deliver. She had planned to say them on their 50th wedding anniversary, which had seemed, when she began planning it, like the appropriate occasion, grand enough to justify the departure from ordinary practice, significant enough that Arthur might receive it without the embarrassment that smaller occasions would produce in him. The words were, "I have been very happy. I want you to know that. Whatever comes next, I was very happy, and it was because of you, and I never said it properly." She had been going to say this on the evening of the anniversary, after the meal, with the particular quality of firmness that had carried her through difficult conversations with difficult people in 62 years of village life, the same firmness that had seen off an unreasonable land agent in 1961 and a vicar she disagreed with fundamentally in 1974, and her own mother-in-law across a sustained campaign from 1948 to 1953. Arthur had fallen asleep at the table. Not rudely. He was 81 and had eaten well, and it was 9:30, and the falling asleep was the gentle, vertical kind, his chin going down by degrees, the way old men fall asleep when they are comfortable. She had looked at him across the table, and she had not woken him. She had thought, later, tomorrow, some other evening. He died the following February of a heart that had been patient long enough. She never said it, Maren says, and the not saying of it, which was not a decision, not really, just a series of postponements that accumulated into an outcome, became the thing she thought about most in the 26 years she lived after him. She looks at the nearest of the three lights. She was not tormented by it. She was too practical for torment. But it was there, a small persistent weight, the knowledge that the truest thing she had felt about her own life had been addressed to the ceiling of her bedroom at night rather than to the man it concerned. The words had found the lake, Maren says, within a year of Edna's death. She does not know the mechanism. She has never known the mechanism. She knows only that the words arrived, and that they are here, and that their warmth has not diminished in the decades since. The second light is Edna's son. His name was Robert, and he had grown up in the farmhouse in County Durham with two parents who loved each other and the farm and him and his sister with evident and genuine devotion, and who demonstrated this through an unbroken pattern of useful action, the meals, the mended things, the consistency of presence, and almost never through words, which had seemed to Robert, growing up, entirely normal, because it was the only version of love he had observed at close range. He had carried this into his own life with the thoroughness of someone transmitting something they believed to be correct. He married a woman named Patricia in 1971. Patricia was warm and expressive by nature. She said what she felt with an ease that Robert found, for the first years of their marriage, slightly alarming, as though the lid might come off something if feelings were given that much air. He had loved her for it, privately, and had not told her so, and had demonstrated it instead through 29 years of reliable action. The car always serviced before long journeys. Her library books always renewed on time. The particular way he brought her tea in the mornings, which she had once described to her sister as the best thing about being married to a man who didn't talk much. His words, the ones that had settled into the lake, had been withheld from his daughter, Catherine, on a specific afternoon in October 1994. Catherine had telephoned from London, where she had been living for 3 years in circumstances that Robert knew were difficult and had not asked about directly, because asking directly was not his method. She was 24 and working in a job she had not planned on, and living in a flat she found dispiriting, and calling her parents on Sunday afternoons with the specific brightness of someone determined not to be a burden. On this particular Sunday, she had said, near the end of the call, in a voice that had the careful quality of something kept level by effort, "I'm all right, Dad. I just wonder sometimes if I'm, I don't know, getting it right." And Robert had felt, with the sudden clarity of a man surprised by the depth of his own feeling, something that he could only have described as, "You are the most capable person I know, and I have watched you your whole life, and I have never doubted you for a moment." He had said, "You'll be fine, love. You've always been fine." She had said, "Yes, thanks, Dad." The call had ended. He had sat for some time in the hall beside the telephone, in the particular silence of a man who has just failed to say something and knows it. He died in 2003. The words had been in the water for 8 years by then. Arrived, Maren's records indicate, within a month of the phone call, the weight of them apparently sufficient to find the lake without significant delay. Catherine is in her 50s now, Maren says. She did get it right, broadly. She runs a small architectural practice. She has 3 children. She is, by most measures, fine. A pause. But she has never entirely stopped wondering. That is what the not saying did. The third light is the most recent. It belongs to Catherine's eldest daughter, whose name is Iris, and who is 27. This one Maren knows less of. It arrived only last year, and the lake gives its newer contents more slowly, as though recent words require more time before they can be known by anyone other than the person who didn't say them. What she knows is this. Iris and her mother, Catherine, had a long argument, the kind that accumulates across years and finally declares itself on an ordinary evening over an ordinary disagreement that was never really the point. The argument had run its course over several weeks of cold silence and then careful rapprochement, and by the end of it, the two of them were in the same place they had always been, fond, a little wary, close in the way of people who are more similar than either fully acknowledges. On the evening of the rapprochement, sitting in Catherine's kitchen over tea that had gone cold, Iris had wanted to say, "I understand now why you are the way you are, and I think you had good reasons, and I love you without the qualifications I've been putting on it." She had said, "I think we're all right, aren't we?" Catherine had said, "Yes, I think so." They were all right. They are all right. The words would have made them more than all right, which is a different thing, but neither of them has yet found the way to it. The third light is the dimmest, Maren says. Recent ones often are. I don't know if that's because they haven't been in the water long enough, or because the situation they came from is still unresolved. She looks at it for a moment. Both, probably. The 3 lights sit in the shallow water in their overlapping warmth. Edna's, which is the brightest, deepest gold of the 3, its edges soft with decades of immersion. Robert's, slightly cooler, slightly smaller, the warmth of it particular and concentrated, and Iris's, the newest and the least settled, its amber shifting slightly, as though it has not yet entirely decided to be still. 3 generations. The same shape of silence, modified slightly in each transmission, like a word copied by hand multiple times, until the copy carries the original's meaning, but not quite its form. You walk on. The shore curves gently south, and the stones continue their conversation underfoot, and the lake remains the lake, its surface untroubled, its color holding, the morning clarity still sharp enough that the bed is visible for several feet out. More lights are visible in the shallows as you walk, some alone, some in pairs, one small cluster of 4 that Maren glances at and makes a brief note about without explanation, which you do not press her on, because there is something in the quality of this morning. The stones underfoot, the still water, the particular pace that Maren sets, that makes pressing seem inappropriate. Things will be said when they will be said. The trees behind the shore have changed slightly as you've walked south. The birch-like ones have given way to something darker and more substantial. Trees whose canopy is lower and whose trunks are wide enough that the light between them is more limited, more categorical. The shade they cast reaches the shore in places, dimming the pale stones and cooling the air perceptibly. And in those shaded sections, the lights in the water are more visible rather than less. The ambient darkness giving them more room to be seen in, the way stars appear when the surrounding light diminishes. Maren stops at a section of shore where a single large boulder sits at the water's edge, too large for the shore's general scale, the kind of geological outlier that arrives in a landscape and never quite explains its presence. She sits on it with the ease of long habit. She has sat on it before, many times. "There's one here I want you to hear," she says. She opens the field notebook to a page with more cross-references than writing, finds the corresponding entry, reads it briefly, closes the notebook again, and puts it away. In the water before her, just past the boulder's shadow, a single light, larger than most of the ones you have seen, its warmth more considerable, the amber of it deeper and more settled. It has been here a long time. You can tell without being told. It has the look of something that arrived a long while ago and found its stone and made no further argument about it. "A man named Thomas Hartley," Maren says. "He was a headmaster, secondary school, comprehensive, in the Midlands. He retired in 1999 after 31 years. She looks at the light. He was not a warm man in the conventional sense. He didn't use people's first names until he'd known them a decade. He had a handshake that colleagues described as correct rather than welcoming. He ran an orderly school and expected orderly behavior and got it, mostly, through the combination of consistency and the particular quality of his presence in a room, which was the kind of presence that doesn't require volume. The light in the water is very still. But he had a student," Maren says, "in 1973, a boy named Marcus Webb, 14 years old, the son of a steelworker, bright in the way that occasionally produces brilliant people and occasionally produces very unhappy ones, and usually nobody can tell in advance which it will be." She pauses. Marcus was not doing well. not academically. Academically, he was exceptional, the kind of exceptional that made marking his work an unusual experience for his teachers because they occasionally encountered ideas they hadn't had themselves. He was not doing well in the other ways, the ways that matter more. Thomas Hartley had seen this, as he saw most things, quietly, without announcing his observation, noting it in the same internal ledger where he kept everything that came to his attention in 31 years of watching young people navigate themselves. He had called Marcus into his office on a Tuesday in November and had said, in the manner of a man attempting to be practical about something that was not entirely practical, "I've been looking at your academic record. It's remarkable. I want you to consider what you might do with a remarkable record." He had then outlined 3 specific paths: university, which Marcus had not considered within his reach, a scholarship he was eligible for, a teacher he should speak to, practical, useful, correct. What he had not said was, "I have been watching you for 2 years, and you are one of the most extraordinary young people I have encountered in a long career, and I need you to understand that, because I'm not sure anyone has told you, and I think the not knowing of it is what is making everything so hard." He had not said it because he was a man of 1973 and a headmaster, and those were not the words available to him within the constraints of what he understood his role to permit. He had said the practical things, and Marcus had listened with the careful attention of a boy who had learned to be careful with hope, and had thanked him correctly and left. Marcus Webb went to university. He became, eventually, a civil engineer of some distinction. He did not become one of the brilliant people who also became unhappy. He got through it and came out the other side and built a reasonable life. But for a long time, a very long time, he had not known, not with any certainty, that he was worth the bother. Thomas Hartley had retired in 1999 and died in 2011, and the words had been in the water since 1974, the winter after the November conversation, the weight of them apparently finding the lake quickly, as some things do. "One of the older ones," Maren says, looking at the light. "You can tell by the color. The older they are, the deeper the amber goes, like wood darkening." She is quiet for a moment. Marcus Webb is in his 60s now. He has grandchildren. He is, on any reasonable assessment, a man who made it. Another pause, shorter. He still doesn't know what Thomas Hartley thought of him. The light in the water is deep amber and perfectly still, the color of something preserved across decades by cold water, and the patient properties of this particular lake, which does not diminish what it holds and does not let it go. The boulder is solid beneath you. The shore's conversation continues its small adjustments. The tree canopy above lets through its limited, categorical light, and in the dimness, the water holds its warmth, and the warmth is amber, and the amber is every word that was ready and went nowhere, that sat at the base of the throat and found the throat closed, that had the shape of something necessary and the weight of something true, and that arrived here instead, in this water, in this valley, In this place that is no place, a map has managed to find. The lake accommodates all of it. Maren closes her eyes for a moment, briefly, just briefly, the gesture of someone checking something internal rather than resting, and opens them and looks at the water with her clear grey eyes and nods minutely at nothing in particular. "Come," she says. "There are more." Part 3. The evening clarity. The morning clarity does not end abruptly. It withdraws in the way that Maren withdraws from conversation when she has said enough, gradually, without announcement, the transparency of the water diminishing by degrees so slow that you cannot catch the change in progress. Only notice, periodically, that the bed is slightly less visible than it was, the lights slightly less distinct, the lake drawing its contents incrementally closer in the way of something that has been generous with its privacy for long enough and is beginning, quietly, to reclaim it. By the time you reach the southern curve of the shore, the shallows show their lights at one remove, still visible, still warm, but softened now, their individual characters blurring slightly at the edges, the way faces blur in old photographs, not because the faces have changed, but because the paper has. The aggregate warmth of them is, if anything, more apparent than it was in the sharp morning light. Individual and particular has become collective and ambient. The lake glows faintly from within. Maren notes the change with a brief glance at the water, nothing more. Evening clarity is different, she says. Morning, you see the individual ones. Evening, you see what they are together. She considers this. I'm not sure which tells you more. She puts the question away, unanswered, as she puts most questions, not dismissing it, just filing it in the section reserved for things that don't yet have answers and may not for some time, which is a large section and well organized. The southern curve of the shore opens onto a wider stretch of stones, broader than the rest, a natural bay in miniature where the lake's edge pulls back slightly from the tree line and leaves a pale crescent of shingle perhaps 40 feet across. At the bay's center, well above the waterline, a wooden bench has been placed. Not a grand bench, not built for the location, but a plain municipal bench of the sort removed from parks during refurbishment and ending up, through the particular logic of such migrations, somewhere unexpected. It has a small metal plate on its back slat, the kind that commemorates someone, but the inscription has weathered past legibility. Maren sits at one end with the ease of long habit. You take the other end. The lake from here is broad and unobstructed, the full sweep of it visible, near shore to far horizon, the far shore its thin dark suggestion in the distance, the surface between holding its blue-grey with the same absolute consistency it has held all day. The lights in the shallows before the bay are visible from the bench as a general warmth in the water, amber beneath blue-grey, the combination producing a color that has no name, but that the eye finds, without being able to say exactly why. Deeply restful, Maren opens the field notebook on her knee. There are two more I want to tell you about, she says, before the light goes entirely. The first concerns a woman named Nadia Osei. She was a nurse, 38 years in surgical wards, and had the specific quality of authority that develops in people who have spent decades in rooms where clarity of communication is not a courtesy, but a clinical necessity. She was not brusque. Her patients would have said the opposite. She had a manner at bedsides that her colleagues described as exact, meaning that she gave people precisely what the moment required, information when information was what was needed, silence when it wasn't, and on occasion a particular quality of still presence that was neither and both. She had 3 sisters, and the 4 of them were close in the way of people who have weathered something significant together and emerged with an understanding that requires very little maintenance. They did not need to speak frequently to remain connected, which was fortunate because their lives were geographically scattered and practically demanding, and phone calls happened when they happened. The younger sister was named Comfort, and she was, in the assessment of everyone who knew the family, including Nadia, especially Nadia, the one who had always made the world seem more navigable, simply by being in it. This was not a quality Comfort had cultivated deliberately. It was simply what she was, in the way that some people are simply warm without trying, the warmth as natural and unremarkable to them as breathing. Comfort had been ill. Not briefly, not ambiguously, but with the sustained and specific seriousness that requires families to reorganize themselves around the fact of it, which the Osei sisters had done with the competence of people who knew how. Nadia, most of all. She had managed the medical questions with 38 years of experience and managed her own responses to those questions in the way she managed most things, rigorously, privately, in the hours between 2 and 4 in the morning, when she sat at her kitchen table with tea and let herself feel what she had set aside during the day. Comfort recovered. She recovered well, comprehensively, in the way that occasionally happens and that everyone in medicine knows not to take for granted and cannot help taking as a personal gift when it does. On the day the final confirmation came, the appointment, the consultant's careful and increasingly warm summary, the walk out into the afternoon, Nadia had taken her sister's arm on the pavement outside the hospital, and they had stood for a moment in the ordinary afternoon, and Nadia had felt moving through her something she could only have described as the full weight of a year of controlled fear releasing at once, and she had wanted to say, "I cannot imagine the world without you in it. I have never told you that. I should have told you long before any of this, when there was no reason to say it, when it was just true and ordinary and didn't have anything to frighten it out of me." She had said, "Right then, shall we get some lunch?" Comfort had said, "God, yes." They had gotten lunch, and it had been a good lunch, and the afternoon had been, in its way, one of the best afternoons of Nadia's life. She does not regret the lunch. She does not regret anything about that afternoon. She thinks sometimes about what she didn't say, not with grief. She is too practically constituted for grief about something that remains sayable, more with the mild impatience of someone who has identified a task she keeps not getting to. Hers came in about 2 years ago, Maren says. It's over there. She indicates the water to the left of the bay without pointing directly. A slight orientation of the head, the gesture of someone who knows exactly where everything is and has stopped needing to point. Bright one, she's still alive. So is comfort. The words are still available to be said. A pause. I have found, Maren says, in the measured tone of someone reporting an observation rather than rendering a judgment, that the ones belonging to living people burn brightest, as though the possibility of resolution keeps them warm. She looks at the water. Or perhaps they're just newer. I've never been able to determine which. The second is older. Much older. One of the oldest in the lake, Maren says. The amber of it so deep and so dark that it reads on the bed of the shallows, less as warm light and more as a quality of the stone itself, as though the stone has absorbed it over the years, the way stone absorbs heat. It came from a man named Aurelio Benedetti, and it came from 1943, and the story behind it is quieter than the circumstances of that year might suggest, which is partly what makes it notable. Aurelio was 22 in 1943, a carpenter's son from a village in the hills above Florence, recently and reluctantly conscripted into a war he had no personal investment in, and for which he had been given a uniform that did not fit him well, and a role that consisted largely of waiting in places he had not chosen for things to happen that he could not predict. He was not a soldier by temperament. He was a young man who had been good at school in ways that the village had not had the resources to do much with, and who had been saving, before the war interrupted, toward an education he had found a way to fund himself through 2 years of work that Maren's notes describe only as considerably more than his age strictly required of him. He had a friend. The friend's name was Emilio, and he had been Aurelio's closest friend since they were 7 years old, and had been seated next to each other on the first day of school by a teacher who had organized the class alphabetically, thereby placing Benedetti next to Caruso, which had turned out to be one of the more consequential pieces of classroom administration in either of their lives. Emilio was the sort of person who made Aurelio and most other people in his vicinity more fully themselves. He had a quality of attention, an interest in people that was genuine rather than sociable, that made the people he spoke with feel their own thoughts were more worth having than they had previously realized. He and Aurelio had spent their boyhood and their early manhood in continuous conversation about books, about the village, about the world they both intended to see, and the people they intended to become in it. Emilio died in November 1943, in circumstances that Maren's notes do not elaborate on, because the circumstances are not the point. What Aurelio had not said, not in 20 years of friendship, not in any of the long conversations, not on the last evening they spent together before the war had separated them definitively, was, "You are the reason I think well of myself. You are the reason I believe my own thoughts are worth thinking. I would not be who I am, whatever that is, without 20 years of your company, and I have never once said so, because it seemed as obvious as the hills, and I did not know it needed saying. He had not said it because it seemed beyond articulation in the way that the most fundamental things sometimes do. Too large, too close, too much a part of the structure of how he understood himself to be easily extracted and presented. He had not said it because Emilio was 23 and healthy, and there was, he had believed, time. Aurelio lived until 1991, Maren says. He got his education eventually. He taught literature for 40 years. She looks at the water. He was, by all available evidence, a man who thought well of himself in the end. He had good reasons to. A silence of some duration. But some mornings, she says, I think the ones that have been here longest are not sad, exactly. They are just very settled. They have been in the water long enough to have made a kind of peace with where they are. She looks at the deep amber glow in the shallows. Aurelio's is like that. It doesn't ask for anything. It has stopped asking for anything. It is simply here. The light is going. Not quickly. Nothing at this lake happens quickly, but the blue-grey of the water has deepened by a shade, and the sky above the valley has taken on a quality of approaching dark that is more sensed than seen. A thickening of the atmosphere, a gathering of the light toward some final accounting before the dark takes over. The lights in the shallows, as Maren predicted, are more apparent rather than less. The whole of the bay's water glows at this hour, the aggregate warmth of everything the lake holds visible now as something unified, not a collection of individual points, but a general amber underneath the surface, as though the lake floor itself is lit, as though the water is merely the medium through which the warmth is expressed. It is very beautiful. This thought arrives without your assistance and is correct. Maren is looking at it too, with the expression of someone for whom the sight is not new and is also never entirely familiar. The slight adjustment that happens in her face when she looks at the lake in this light, a softening of the habitual practicality, something underneath it that is neither sentiment nor its absence, but something more specific to a person who has spent years keeping records of other people's most private losses and has, in the process, understood something about the human interior that is difficult to put in a notebook. She has not tried to put it in a notebook. Some things are for the 48th notebook, and some things are not. Do you want to know what I think? She says. She does not wait for an answer, which suggests this is something she has thought about enough that it no longer requires an invitation. I think the words that find this lake are not failures, she says. That is how they feel to the people they came from. Failures of nerve, or timing, or the right vocabulary. Things that should have happened and didn't. She looks at the water. But I have spent a long time looking at what they leave behind, and I don't think that's what they are. The amber in the water is deep now, fully itself. the individual lights indistinguishable from each other in the general warmth. I think they are the proof that the feeling existed, she says. Philip looked at Rosa on that stage and felt something so large it frightened him. Thomas Hartley watched Marcus Webb for 2 years and thought, extraordinary. Aurelio carried 20 years of gratitude so enormous it had no door it could fit through. She pauses. The feeling was real. The feeling was, in most of these cases, accurate. The word not being said did not make the feeling untrue. She is quiet for a moment. The lake holds what was true, she says. That is what I have come to think. Not what was said, what was true. The water holds its warmth. The valley holds the water. The hills at the northern and southern edges hold the valley in their pale stone arms, patient and geological, unconcerned with the specific human dramas of the shore below. You stay on the bench for some time after Maren stops speaking. This is not awkward. Maren does not treat silence as something that requires filling, which is, in the context of a lake that holds unspoken words, either deeply appropriate or mildly ironic or both, and she has never decided which. The dark comes in the way it comes here, not as an event, but as a gradual shift in what the world is made of. The light thinning and the dark thickening, and the line between them impossible to locate until it has already passed. The trees behind the shore become shapes rather than trees. The far horizon loses its thin dark line and becomes simply the limit of what can be seen, which is nothing, which is the same color as everything else. The lights in the water remain. This is, Maren has noted in the 48th notebook, one of the properties of the lake that she finds most worth recording, that the darkness does not diminish what it holds. If anything, the reverse. In the full dark of the valley, with the sky above showing its stars through a gap in the cloud, this valley, this sky, these particular stars, the lake is amber from shore to visible depth, warm and entire, the accumulated warmth of every true thing that went unsaid by every person whose silence had enough weight to find the water. It is a great deal of warmth. It is, it turns out, sufficient to light the shore. Maren stands. She puts the field notebook away into the correct pocket with the automatic gesture of someone ending a working day, which this is, more or less, though her working days do not have clean edges, and she has stopped expecting them to. She looks at the lake for a moment, in the way she always looks at it before she goes in for the night. The brief assessment, the internal note. It'll all be here in the morning, she says. She says it the way people say things that are true and also means something else. Not comfort, not consolation, but the simple and reliable fact of it. The lake will be here, and the warmth in it will be here, and the words will be here, and the people who sit on this bench and look at them will, in time, be here too. Everything that found this lake found it for good, which is not a sad thought from the bench in the dark, with the water lit from within. It is something else. She walks back along the shore toward the trees and the cottage, her footsteps on the stones, the same steady sound they have always been. Unhurried, precise. The footsteps of a woman who knows exactly where she is going because she has been going there a long time. The sound diminishes. The stones, released from her step, make their last small adjustments and go still. You are alone on the bench in the way that is not loneliness, but its opposite, the full and quiet presence of someone who is somewhere entirely, who has been received by a place rather than merely arrived in it. The bench is solid. The pale stones of the shore are solid. The lake is in front of you, enormous and patient, and the color of the scene between night and morning, lit from within by everything it has been trusted to hold. Your breath is slow. The warmth from the water reaches the shore at this hour as something almost physical, a slight additional temperature in the air off the lake, noticeable in the way that kindness is noticeable when it is genuine and not performed, not announced, simply present and offering itself without condition. Let it reach you. It has come a long way, from the back of Philip's throat on a stage in the moment. He understood what he felt for his daughter, from Thomas Hartley's closed office in November 1973, from a pavement outside a hospital where two sisters stood in the ordinary afternoon, from a hillside village in 1943, where a young man had carried 20 years of wordless gratitude toward a friend who would not be there to receive it. All of it here, all of it warm, all of it proof of nothing except the thing Maren said, which was the truest thing said on this shore today, that the feeling was real, that the feeling exists somewhere, even when the moment that should have held it has long since passed. That love which found no words still found somewhere to go. This lake, patient and enormous, and the color of the hour before dawn. This water, holding everything it was given. This shore, and the bench, and the stones making no sound now, and you on the bench with your slow breath and your stillness and the warmth of the lake in the air before you. Let it be enough. Let it be, in fact, more than enough. The lights in the water do not require your attention to continue burning. They have been burning without anyone watching for longer than most things last. They will burn after you have closed your eyes, after the bench has received the full weight of you, after your breath has gone slower still, and the last of the day's residue has released itself into the dark of the valley, and the valley has received it as it receives everything, without judgment, without condition, with the complete and geological patience of a place that has been holding things for longer than the things themselves can remember. Close your eyes. The lake is still there. It will still be there. The warmth in it is for keeps.